You're standing at the edge of a vast field of darkness, the kind that swallows sound and softens the outlines of distant shapes. The air is cool, almost metallic, and you can feel a faint vibration beneath your feet. Not loud, not sharp, but steady, like the slow pulse of something enormous waking up. Ahead of you, a glow begins to tremble against the night sky. Not sunrise, not fire, something in between. Before you drift off, take a moment to subscribe, but only if stories told in whispers are your kind of thing. And tell us where you're listening from, or which image lingers with you the most. You're listening to Echoes of War. A single torch lifts, then another still, until the darkness seems to crack open under the weight of thousands of small flames. They sway like restless stars, flickering in the cold air. You hear a murmur ripple through the crowd, a low, unhurried wave, building, pausing, rising again. You don't see faces at first. Only outlines, shadows, silhouettes standing shoulder to shoulder, their breaths drifting like pale ghosts in the night. The light grows brighter. Spotlights sweep upward in perfect mechanical arcs, carving pale corridors into the sky. They move like the ribs of a giant skeleton, opening and closing, folding and unfolding, all choreographed by hands you cannot see. You watch from the edge, where the noise is thinner, where the earth feels softer beneath your shoes. You are not in the crowd, but near enough to hear the hum of anticipation, the drawn breath of thousands waiting for a signal. Somewhere in the distance, a drum begins to tap, hollow, slow, like a heartbeat learning its rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. You can almost feel the pattern settling into the bones of the people around you. Then, above the torches, above the spotlights, above the controlled silence of so many gathered bodies, a flag unfurls. Its fabric snaps in the wind like a warning you can't quite decipher. Here, in this field near Nuremberg in the late 1930s, a new kind of spectacle is taking shape. A theater of power built from symbols, light, and noise. You don't hear speeches, not from where you stand. You don't need to. The atmosphere itself tells the story. The rising heat of torches, the synchronized movements, the architecture designed to dwarf the individual, the rehearsed unity that leaves no room for questions. You might wonder when it all began, when the world's quiet drift became something heavier, something leaning toward the shadow you feel settling over this place. But beginnings are rarely sharp. They seep. They soak into the cracks of crises and fear. They cling to those searching for certainty in unraveling times. For now, you stand in this moment, not the first, not the last, with the night breathing in torchlight, with wind carrying murmurs in a language that seems too synchronized to be natural. Far away from this rally, people sit in Berlin cafes with newspapers trembling in their hands. They talk about inflation, about lost jobs, about new promises rising on street corners. In rural towns, men in worn coats listen to radios that hiss and crackle with voices insisting the future can be rescued. In crowded city squares, young people chant slogans they barely understand, feeling the strange comfort of belonging. Across Europe, similar patterns twist through the air. In Italy, a decade earlier, black-clad marchers moved through streets claiming to restore order. In Spain, the smell of gunpowder and burning churches signaled a civil war born from old fractures. And farther east, Japan's drums beat toward empire, echoing different oceans, different horizons. But Germany is where the storm coils tightest. And here, at this rally, you sense it. A shift that is not sudden but steady, not explosive but inevitable. People cheer. Spotlights sweep. Torches burn without wavering. Yet beneath all of it, beneath the choreography and the spectacle, there is a quiet that feels wrong. A quiet too deliberate, too heavy, as if the silence itself is part of the performance. You stand at the edge and watch as the flames blur in the night air. The heat rises in soft waves. The speeches echo in the distance, their words carried more as vibration than meaning. It is a kind of trance, one designed to pull people inward, away from doubt and toward obedience. And you can feel, in this moment, how easily fear becomes unity, how unity becomes power, how power becomes something darker when given form through spectacle. The night absorbs everything, the torchlight, the breath of thousands, the rising chant you can barely make out. It folds it all into a single impression, a world drifting towards something it does not understand. Chapter 1: The Broken Republic. Germany after the Great War. The torches of Nuremberg fade behind you like distant storms, their glow swallowed by the long corridors of time. As you drift backward through history, the night softens, the air cools, and the noise dissolves into a quieter world, one full of exhaustion, debt, and lost illusions. You're standing now on a railway platform in the winter of 1919. The train whistles sound thin, tired, stripped of urgency. The tracks gleam with a cold metal sheen, cutting through the early morning fog. Around you, men in worn uniforms step off with the slow, uneven movements of people returning from somewhere they don't wish to remember. Their boots make a soft, rhythmic clatter on the platform, but there is no triumph in their posture, no cheers, no crowds with flowers. Only fatigue, and a question hanging in the air like smoke. What now? Germany, newly defeated in the First World War, is not yet a nation rebuilding. It is a nation pausing, stunned, hollowed out, searching for a shape it no longer recognizes. You hear the shuffle of paper as a station worker pins a fresh notice to a board already crowded with bills. New prices, new shortages, new regulations. His hands move calmly, but you notice a slight tremble in his fingers. Behind the fog, in the distant city streets, a republic has been declared, the Weimar Republic, born from necessity rather than celebration. Democracy arrives not as a dream, but as a compromise, a fragile bridge built over deep fractures. You watch one of the returning soldiers adjust the strap of a nearly empty duffel bag. His medals clink softly against each other, metallic ghosts of a war that promised glory but delivered rubble. He looks around, searching for someone, but no one is here to greet him. After a moment, he lowers his head and walks on. He is not alone. Across Germany, millions return to a country that feels foreign. Cities hum with political arguments. Factories wait for coal that may never arrive. Old empires crumble while new parties swarm into the vacuum, dozens of them, each claiming they can resurrect a broken nation. You sense the atmosphere thickening with uncertainty. A man passing you unfolds a newspaper, Die Freiheit, and you catch a glimpse of the headline, Armistice signed. Germany to accept responsibility for the war. That word, responsibility, will echo for years, like a stone dropped into a deep well. The weight of defeat. In 1919, Germany signs the Treaty of Versailles, and the world rewrites its boundaries. You see it in the way men curse under their breath at café tables, in the sharp, nervous energy of parliamentary debates, in the quiet despair of women who line up for food with ration cards pressed between their palms. Reparations become a constant presence, a shadow over every conversation, every misfortune, every failing business. And as the winter deepens, you feel something else forming beneath the surface. Not just anger, but longing, a yearning for structure, certainty, meaning, a desire for anyone who promises to restore dignity. You walk through a Berlin street where posters peel from the walls in the cold. One calls for unity. Another demands revolution. Another warns of capitalist conspiracies. Another promises national resurgence. The colors blur into a collage of desperation. And somewhere in this noise, a small party meets in dim, smoky beer halls, one so obscure that few take it seriously. Its name changes, evolves, grows sharper with time. The National Socialist German Workers' Party. But for now, they are almost invisible. The first seeds of catastrophe rarely announce themselves. Inflation like a storm. By 1923, the paper money you hold in your hand feels weightless, not because it is light, but because it is almost worthless. You can smell the ink, fresh, overwhelming, as new notes spill from printing presses day and night, rivers of currency trying to fill an ocean of debt. The air tastes strange in these years, as if even the atmosphere carries the bitterness of devaluation. You walk past a bakery where the owner has stopped updating his chalkboard prices. Instead, he erases numbers with rapid strokes, rewriting them every few hours as the mark loses value with frightening speed. A woman enters, clutching a basket of money. Not bread. Money. The owner weighs the bills with a scale usually reserved for flour. People no longer count currency. They measure it. A worker receives his wages twice a day, so he can rush out during breaks to buy anything before prices rise again. Children play with stacks of banknotes as if they were building blocks. A man burns money in his stove because paper has become cheaper than firewood. You can almost feel the world tilting. In this environment, extremism doesn't just grow, it finds fertile soil. Dozens of political groups claim salvation. Dozens promise rebirth. You hear a speech echoing from a public square. A voice sharp, emotional, insistent, not yet powerful, but practiced. He speaks of betrayal, humiliation, renewal. People stop to listen, not because they believe him yet, but because they want to believe in something. A republic under siege. There are moments when a nation seems to lose its balance, and the Weimar Republic lives permanently in that precarious space, standing upright only because it has not yet fallen. You walk through the halls of the Reichstag, where the air hums with argument. Coalition governments rise and collapse in rapid succession. Parties fracture. Alliances dissolve. Confidence evaporates. Each year feels like a different season. One year brings promise, cultural flourishing, new art, new cinema, new freedoms. Another brings riots, assassinations, street battles between political militias. You see uniformed groups marching in tight formation. Brown shirts here, black shirts there, red banners in another street. They pass each other like rival tides, each convinced they are the future. The Republic bends under their weight. And in Munich, 1923, a failed uprising unfolds, dramatic, clumsy, and quickly crushed. The man at its center is arrested, his political movement temporarily shattered. But you sense there is something unfinished in him, a pause, not a defeat. In prison, he writes, revises, edits, and dreams. Words sharpen into ideology. Myth hardens into belief. The calm before the storm. You step into the late 1920s, and for a moment the world appears to steady itself. Streets brighten with advertisements. Trams ring their bells with renewed optimism. Cafes fill with laughter and cigarettes and music that floats lightly above the tables. It feels almost safe. The German economy stabilizes. Foreign loans flow in. Architecture rises. Cinema flourishes. Paintings challenge old norms. Writers fill small notebooks with ideas that crackle like electricity. For a few years, you sense a fragile beauty, a reprieve, a world trying to breathe. But the calm has a brittle quality. Beneath it, fractures remain unhealed. And then the stock market collapses. Not here, but across the ocean, and the shockwave ripples outward like a long, invisible earthquake. By 1930, unemployment lines stretch through Berlin streets. Factories close. Families lose savings overnight. Men gather on corners, staring at their empty hands as if answers might appear there. In these years, the quiet desperation returns, heavier than before. People turn again to voices promising certainty, order, security, pride. And among those voices is one that has become sharper, louder, more refined, more theatrical in its ability to tap into fear. Adolf Hitler. The fringe party that once met in small beer halls now draws crowds that overflow public squares. Its members march in tight formation. Its symbols multiply. Its slogans ring out with conviction. But what you notice most is not the noise. It is the silence between the noise. A silence that suggests surrender. A silence that suggests inevitability. History is rarely a straight line. It is a spiral tightening around moments like these. You stand once more at the threshold of a country searching for itself, torn between memory and myth, between democracy and disorder, between light and a gathering darkness. The Republic still stands, but you can feel it unraveling. Here, in these fragile years, the road to war is already forming, not yet visible in full, but present in the atmosphere, like a storm gathering beyond the horizon. And as you listen to the wind moving through the narrow streets of Berlin, as newspapers flutter against lampposts and political posters peel in the night air, you sense the same slow, inexorable drift you felt in Nuremberg. A nation stepping quietly toward catastrophe. Chapter 2. The Man Who Promised Order. The winter of 1930 settles over Germany like a thick, unbroken layer of frost. You can almost feel its weight, not just on rooftops and empty streets, but on the minds of the people who walk through them with their collars pulled high and their thoughts held close. Factories that once hummed now stand silent. Windows are dark. Smoke no longer rises from chimneys that burned day and night before the world's economy collapsed. In this cold, brittle air, you sense something more than economic hardship. You sense a quiet rearranging of hope, a shift from the possible to the desperate, from complexity to craving simplicity. Men gather around the corners of job centers, stamping their feet against the cold. They speak in hushed tones, as if ashamed of their own uncertainty. Women form long lines outside soup kitchens, holding metal bowls that clatter softly when wind pushes through the alleyway. You watch from the edge of these scenes, close enough to feel the tension, far enough to sense the broader atmosphere tightening like a wire. And it is in this environment, this landscape of hunger and restlessness, that a once fringe figure finds his moment. The voice that grew too loud to ignore. At first, his name drifts softly at the edges of conversations. A rumor, a mention, a curiosity. People say he speaks with a strange intensity, unsettling yet compelling. Others dismiss him as too emotional, too theatrical, too extreme. But gradually, his voice seeps into public squares, radio waves, and nightly discussions around dim kitchen tables. You hear him before you see him, a cadence rising and falling, punctuated by long pauses designed not for thought, but for tension. His speeches carry the rhythm of certainty, a sharp contrast to the hesitant, fractured voices of the politicians who argue without resolve inside the Reichstag. He frames the nation's pain as betrayal, its confusion as conspiracy, its suffering as deliberate humiliation. And though his words are harsh, The listener's faces soften with recognition, because despair is easier to bear when it has a name. You stand at the back of a crowded hall in a regional town. The air smells of sweat and cigarette smoke. The wooden floor creaks beneath the shifting weight of restless bodies. He is on a small stage, illuminated by a dim spotlight that throws stark shadows behind him. His gestures are sharp. His voice climbs in crescendos. But what you notice most is not the noise. It is the reaction. People lean forward. Hands tighten on chairs. Eyes narrow with fierce attention. He doesn't merely offer policies. He offers a story, a narrative of rebirth, revenge, restoration. And for individuals drowning in uncertainty, stories are life rafts. The machinery of myth. Propaganda is not just words. It is an environment, an atmosphere you can almost breathe. You walk through Berlin in 1931 and see posters plastered on walls, their bright colors slicing through the winter gloom. You hear radios in shop windows transmitting fiery speeches. You notice newspapers eager for dramatic headlines, giving outsized attention to those who speak in absolutes. But propaganda's most powerful tool is not imagery. It is repetition. Again and again, slogans echo. Again and again, symbols appear. Again and again, a simple message replaces a complex world. You pass a room where a small team meets under harsh electric light. They discuss fonts, colors, angles, how to magnify presence, how to create the illusion of inevitability. Their work is methodical, almost clinical, and across Germany, uniformed groups march with unsettling precision. Brown shirts aligned shoulder to shoulder, boots thudding in perfect synchrony, banners rising like rows of dark sails. The symbolism is unmistakable. The message unmistakably clear. A movement that once felt chaotic now appears disciplined, orderly, almost militaristic. A movement born from resentment now presents itself as the embodiment of strength. You watch from the sidewalk as the marching column passes. Dust rises in soft clouds beneath their boots. Windows tremble slightly. People look away, or look too long. And somewhere in that charged silence, uncertainty begins to look like weakness. Complexity begins to feel exhausting. Democracy begins to appear fragile. Order, even harsh order, begins to look comforting. The collapse of the center. By 1932, Germany is balancing on the thinnest possible edge. Inside the Reichstag, arguments fracture every attempt at stability. Parties refuse to work together. Coalitions splinter before they can function. Laws stall in endless debate. Democracy is not failing because it is flawed, but because it is exhausted. You walk into the Reichstag gallery one late afternoon. The room feels too large for the voices fighting inside it. Chairs scrape. Papers shuffle. Anger erupts in sharp bursts. But the loudest sound is the vacuum where unity should be. Outside, political street violence intensifies. Communists and Nazis clash in alleys. Paramilitary groups train openly. Fear hangs over neighborhoods like thick fog. A shopkeeper boards up her window long before nightfall. A teacher dismisses her students early after hearing rumors of fighting near the station. Parents pull children indoors as soon as the sky turns orange. You can almost feel society narrowing, people withdrawing into themselves, looking for stability anywhere they can find it. And then, in the summer elections, something shifts. The Nazi Party becomes the largest in the Reichstag. Not a majority, but no longer fringe. A force that cannot be ignored. A force too large to contain. January 1933. A door quietly closes. You find yourself walking along Wilhelmstrasse on a cold, grey morning. The windows of the government buildings reflect a dull sky, and the street feels unusually still. There are no crowds, no celebrations, no banners, only a handful of officials and guards moving with hushed urgency. And then, with no fanfare, no echo of footsteps, no dramatic proclamation, a political arrangement is finalized behind closed doors. A few men, believing they can control him, believing he can be boxed in, believing his fire can be useful but contained, make him Chancellor of Germany. January 30th, 1933. A date that unfolds with quiet, devastating subtlety. You hear a single door close inside the Chancellery. The sound is soft, almost gentle, but it resonates like a hinge turning in history. Outside, people read newspapers with cautious curiosity. Some smile, some frown. Most simply shrug and return to their errands. After all, the appointment seems temporary, a compromise, a stopgap solution. Few sense the depth of the shift beneath their feet. Few understand how quickly democratic structures can be dismantled from within. And as evening falls, a torchlight procession moves slowly toward the Chancellery. The flames sway in the cold air. Boots strike the pavement with deliberate rhythm. Shadows crawl across the walls. You watch from a distance, feeling a strange mixture of silence and inevitability. The torches gleam like reflections of the ones you saw in Nuremberg. This is where the paths connect, where the spectacle meets the hungry crowd, where the promises meet the desperation. A republic is not destroyed in one dramatic moment. It erodes quietly, like frost melting underfoot until the ground gives way. Tonight, the light from the procession flickers across the building's stone facade. In those flames, you see more than celebration. You see a warning, soft, glowing, unmistakable. The man who promised order now holds power, and the machinery that carried him here is only beginning to turn. The aftermath of a choice. In the weeks following his appointment, the atmosphere in Germany changes in subtle but undeniable ways. New decrees appear, administrative, technical, seemingly mundane. Political opponents find their meetings disrupted. Journalists receive warnings cloaked as friendly advice. Radio stations adjust their programming without explanation. Nothing explosive. Nothing dramatic. Just a gentle tightening, like a hand slowly closing around an object. You hear a woman on a tram whisper to her friend about the new tone on the streets. A factory worker notes that certain colleagues no longer show up for shifts. A shop owner removes a political leaflet from her window after a polite visit from two men who merely wanted to chat. And yet, most people continue their routines. Life does not stop. It simply bends. You feel the bend more than you see it. The air seems heavier. The silence seems more deliberate. The past seems further away than it should be. A movement that once thrived on chaos now begins to cultivate order, but it is an order built not from stability, but from control. And still, the majority remains uncertain, curious, cautious. Few understand the shape the future is taking. Few sense how narrow the corridor of freedom has become. You stand at the edge once more, watching as the new Chancellor steps into a car surrounded by aides and uniformed men. The door closes with a soft click. Another quiet sound. Another hinge turning. History rarely roars. Sometimes it barely whispers. And yet, the whispers can change everything. Chapter 3. Fire in the Reichstag. How fear became a tool. The winter after Hitler becomes Chancellor is strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in the way a forest feels before a storm turns its weight toward the trees. You walk through Berlin at dusk, and the streets feel thinner than they should. Windows emit soft yellow glows, the same as any other year, but something about the way curtains shift, how conversations pause when footsteps approach, suggests that people are waiting for something. They just don't know what. Snowflakes fall on the wide avenue that leads toward the government district. They melt almost instantly on the warm pavement, leaving faint dark spots that vanish just as quickly. There's a feeling in the air, not expectation, but tension wrapped in routine. The kind of tension people breathe in without realizing it, like dust from an old apartment you stop noticing after a while. And then, one cold evening in February 1933, the quiet ends. The night of the fire. You see it first as an orange glow rising above the rooftops. Not bright, not a roaring blaze, just a strange, flickering pulse in the sky, as if someone has set the clouds alight from below. People begin to move toward the Reichstag instinctively, pulled by the glow the way travelers follow the beam of a distant lighthouse. Their footsteps crunch across patches of icy cobblestone. Coats flap in the wind as the smell of burning wood grows stronger. You join them at a slow, steady pace. When you reach the square, you feel the heat immediately. Not harsh, just a dull warmth pressing outward from the building's shattered windows. Smoke curls upward in soft, writhing columns. Flames lick the inner walls with a strange, hypnotic rhythm. The Reichstag, the heart of German democracy, is burning. Firefighters shout orders through the haze. Streams of water arc upward, hissing as they meet the flames. The crowd tightens, whispering, pointing, exchanging murmurs that blend into one trembling hum. Some faces are frightened. Some are confused. Some are disturbingly calm. And then he arrives. Hitler steps into the square surrounded by ministers and uniformed aides. His face is tight, eyes burning with something that is not shock. His movements are sharp, controlled, unmistakably intentional. The flames reflect in his gaze like sparks caught in glass. You watch from a distance as he surveys the fire not with fear, but with recognition, as though he sees not destruction but opportunity. Within minutes, he is shouting about treason, conspiracy, threats against the nation. His voice rises above the crackling of the flames, cutting through the heavy air. The accusation spreads as quickly as the fire did. A scapegoat, an enemy, someone to blame. And even though investigators will debate the cause for decades, the conclusion drawn that night becomes the foundation of a new reality. Fear is useful. Fear creates permission. Fear will become law. The Reichstag Fire Decree. The next morning, Berlin wakes under a different sky. The smoke has cleared, but the air feels heavier, as if the fire left something behind. Not ash, not soot, but a silence that carries intention. You walk past newspaper kiosks where headlines scream about conspiracy and subversion. Papers are snapped from bundles before the ink is fully dry. A man mutters that Germany is under attack from within. Another nods, swallowing the explanation without question. Fear can be a comforting story. That same day, a decree is drafted hurriedly, signed swiftly, and enacted immediately. The Reichstag Fire Decree. Its words are sharp, precise, seemingly temporary, but their effect is permanent. Civil liberties suspended. Freedom of the press restricted. Privacy weakened. Detentions without trial permitted. You picture the decree's paper lying on a desk somewhere, warm from the lamp above it, ink barely set, edges crisp. A document that looks small yet casts a shadow stretching far into the future. For now, it's just words. But words can be weapons, quieter than guns and far more enduring. The first quiet purge. Within days, police raids sweep through neighborhoods before dawn. Doors are knocked upon softly, then beaten upon loudly. People are taken away in trucks with covered windows. Records burn. Offices are sealed. Opposition voices fall silent one by one. But the city does not erupt into chaos. It does not scream or protest in the streets. The changes happen with a frightening gentleness, as if they are part of the natural order, a simple extension of the emergency. You watch officers walk past you carrying folders, ledgers, boxes of documents. Their boots leave clean, precise prints in the thin layer of melting snow. Above them, the sky remains pale and indifferent. Inside cafes, people lower their voices. Inside trams, passengers sit rigidly with newspapers folded neatly in their laps. Inside small apartments, radios whisper the same reassuring message. Order is being restored. The city appears calm because fear rarely moves chaotically. It moves under the skin. The Enabling Act. March 1933 arrives with a thin sun that fails to warm Berlin's cold stone corridors. You walk toward the Kroll Opera House, temporarily converted into the meeting place of the Reichstag. The building's facade is stiff and formal, its windows reflecting a sky that seems exhausted. Outside, uniformed men line the street. Not many, but enough. Enough to signal expectations. Enough to remind onlookers what order now looks like. Inside, tension coils tightly between the rows of seats. The Enabling Act is presented, a law that will allow the Chancellor to enact legislation without parliamentary consent. A shift from democracy to something quieter, sharper, more absolute. He stands before the Assembly, speaking with the gravity of someone claiming national salvation. His voice is softer than during rallies, almost gentle, but the gentleness feels dangerous. A calm hand offering a cup that might contain poison. Some delegates resist. Some tremble. Some attempt to argue. But the decision has already been shaped by fear, by violence, by the promise of stability. When the vote is cast, the silence afterward is thick, almost suffocating. The act passes. A republic dies not with gunfire, but with raised hands under a watching gaze. Outside, the street remains quiet. A carriage rolls by. A bird lands momentarily on a lamp-post. Life continues, indifferent to the hinge that has just shifted the course of history. You hear a woman say to her companion, "It will bring order. For now, we need order." Her voice carries the tragic truth of many eras. People rarely surrender freedom willingly. They surrender it when they believe it will save them. The slow tightening of the net. Weeks pass, and the atmosphere in Germany becomes subtly different. Newspapers begin to sound the same. Films adjust their tone. Teachers modify their lessons. Historians revise their interpretations. You notice posters being removed from kiosks and replaced with new ones that share identical color palettes, slogans, and imagery. Radio broadcasts grow warmer in tone, more hopeful in vocabulary, but narrower in content. Censorship doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, like dust settling on a bookshelf. Children march in youth groups with clean uniforms and eager eyes. Businesses hang new symbols above their doors. Civil servants rehearse new procedures whispered to them in meetings. Everywhere you turn, Small details align. A synchronized shift that feels less like change and more like orchestrated choreography. The country is not being transformed overnight. It is being adjusted, calibrated, tightened, and still, the streets remain calm. People shop, children play, trams rattle down the tracks. Daily life continues, but with each passing week, it belongs less to the people and more to the state. The silence that follows. You find yourself on a quiet bridge overlooking the Spree River at twilight. The surface of the water reflects the dim lights of the city, long, shimmering streaks that tremble gently with the current. A man stands near you, gazing at the water with his hands buried deep in his coat pockets. He murmurs something almost inaudible. It's peaceful again. And it is, superficially. Crime has decreased. Street fights have lessened. The visible chaos has receded. But the peace feels like a blanket placed over something that still breathes underneath. You watch as the wind pushes ripples across the river. The reflections distort, break, reform. This is how society changes, not in explosions, but in slow warping waves that eventually reshape the entire surface. The fear remains. The suspicion remains. The uncertainty remains. But they no longer belong to the streets. They belong to people's private thoughts, locked away, unspoken, growing heavy. And overhead, in dim offices lit by yellow bulbs, the machinery of control hums onward. Plans are drafted, lists compiled, opponents monitored. Germany is no longer drifting. It is being steered, quietly, steadily, irrevocably, toward a destination few can yet see. The fire that consumed the Reichstag did not end in ash. It lingered, invisible, in laws and offices and whispered instructions. And you can feel it now. The heat of it still glowing beneath the floorboards of a country walking calmly toward its own unmaking. Chapter 4. A Nation Rearranged. Gleichschaltung, when everything begins to align. Spring unfolds over Germany with deceptive gentleness. Trees bud along the avenues. The air softens. Shadows lengthen in the late afternoon sun. From a distance, the country looks unchanged, even peaceful. But when you step closer, when you observe with a quieter kind of attention, you sense the truth. The landscape is no longer shifting naturally. It is being arranged, as if invisible hands are moving pieces on a board, as if the country itself is learning a new choreography. You walk through Berlin in the early months of 1933 and notice how the daily rhythms hold their usual shape, but the tone beneath them has changed. Shopkeepers sweep their doorsteps with slightly more urgency. Civil servants carry folders more tightly against their chests. Teachers lower their voices when students leave the room. Something is settling over the country like fine dust, subtle, sticky, difficult to brush away. And that something has a name. Gleichschaltung, coordination, alignment, the quiet fusing of every institution into a single, obedient flow. You hear the word whispered in offices, printed in papers, muttered by workers who don't know whether to fear it or welcome it. Mostly, they simply absorb it, the way you absorb the smell of rain in the air without realizing it's coming. The disappearing middle ground. The first institutions to bend are political. You walk past the headquarters of once influential parties, now shuttered, their signs removed, their members scattered. The windows are dark, with faint outlines where posters used to hang. Inside, dust gathers on desks that were once cluttered with debate and paperwork. Moderate voices disappear from Parliament. Centrist newspapers shrink in size. Liberal clubs close without announcements. The middle ground, that fragile, essential space, becomes a void. You see a journalist sitting alone at a cafe table, staring at a blank sheet of paper. He taps his pen, sighs, writes one sentence, then quickly scratches it out. Not because it is wrong, but because it is no longer safe. He folds the empty page, pays his bill, and leaves without looking back. In times like these, silence becomes self-defense, and silence spreads faster than fear. Reshaping the states. Germany is not yet fully centralized, not until the new government begins to redraw the map. You travel by train through the countryside, watching fields roll past like sheets of muted gold. Villages tucked between gentle hills look untouched by politics, but they too are being rewritten. State parliaments dissolve. Regional leaders are replaced. Uniformed figures take up positions in town halls where mayors once held unchallenged authority. At each stop, you notice the same details repeating. A flag replaced. A new civil servant introduced. A meeting called with unusual urgency. A bulletin posted with a tone that feels too direct, too final. This is not the chaos of revolution. It is the quiet efficiency of absorption. A nation that once balanced regional identities now tightens into a single spine. The process is so steady, so administrative, that many people barely notice. They simply follow instructions, sign documents, attend compulsory meetings, update records. Coordination begins to feel like compliance. Compliance begins to feel like normalcy. And normalcy, once redefined, becomes difficult to question. The transformation of culture. Culture does not collapse. It adapts. You walk into a cinema one warm evening. The line snakes around the block, filled with people eager for distraction. Inside, the theater smells of popcorn, damp coats, and the faint sweetness of perfume. But before the film begins, a short piece plays, a newsreel, crisp and carefully edited. It shows smiling faces, orderly crowds, uplifting slogans, parades with synchronized movements. The audience watches quietly, not with enthusiasm, not with resistance, just with the blank acceptance that repetition breeds. You hear a boy whisper to his father, "Is that real?" The father hesitates, then nods, not because he believes it, but because contradicting the real suddenly feels complicated. Culture shifts in small increments. A play closes earlier than expected. A controversial novel quietly disappears from bookstores. An art exhibition is postponed indefinitely. When painters receive guidance about appropriate themes, most comply. Not because they fear punishment, but because they fear obscurity. And obedience is often easier than risking invisibility. You stand in a gallery where landscapes replace once radical works. The walls look calm, but the silence feels heavy. Youth rewritten. Children adapt more quickly than adults. Their worlds are still soft, still malleable. You walk past a schoolyard at recess. The shouts and laughter sound no different from those of any other era. But the games have changed. Instead of chasing each other or inventing stories, groups of children practice drills. They stand in lines, march in small circles, raise arms in gestures they do not fully understand. A teacher watches with arms folded, her expression unreadable. Is she proud? Obedient? Troubled? You cannot tell. Inside classrooms, maps are updated. History textbooks are revised. Speeches find their way into morning routines. Songs change. Symbols appear on walls that once displayed only alphabet charts and seasonal drawings. A girl sits at her desk, tracing one of the new symbols with her finger. She is not frightened. She is curious. Children do not resist what they are taught. Children absorb. One day, the old lessons fade into the recesses of memory. The new ones settle like roots, and generations begin to tilt. The disappearing press. You pick up a newspaper in a kiosk under soft morning light. At first glance, it looks like any other paper. Columns of text, bold headlines, grainy photographs framed in neat borders. But as you read, you notice something missing. Variety, argument, dissonance. The edges have been filed down, the perspectives aligned, the dissent folded into ambiguity. Reports blur into one tone, bright, assured, purposeful. Political news reads like triumph. Economic news reads like recovery. Cultural updates read like celebration. Even weather forecasts feel optimistic. As you flip the pages, you hear a vendor mutter. They all say the same thing now. He doesn't sound angry, just resigned. Acceptance is the quiet twin of surrender. And in this new landscape, where every newspaper echoes the same message, people begin to believe not in truth, but in inevitability. A leader becomes a symbol. You walk into a public square where a crowd has gathered, not enormous, not frenzied, but steady. Banners flap in the warm spring breeze. A podium has been erected beneath a row of towering lights. When Hitler appears, the reaction is strangely muted. There are cheers, yes, but not wild ones. The noise feels rehearsed, like applause at a well-practiced concert. He speaks with a calm authority, stripped of the early fire that once shocked audiences. This new tone is deliberate, careful, designed to sound presidential, inevitable. He talks about unity, about destiny, about the new Germany rising from hardship. People nod, some with conviction, some with uncertainty, some simply because everyone else is nodding. You watch from the shadow of a column, observing the subtle shifts. How people straighten when he raises his voice. How they lean in when he pauses. How their eyes reflect the lights in a way that makes them seem already halfway convinced. The man who once relied on volume now relies on presence, on posture, on myth. Leaders rise through power. Symbols rise through perception. He is becoming the latter. And the country, numb from crisis, hungry for identity, begins to shape him into something larger than a politician. The hope that blinds. In the early months of 1934, you notice a strange thing. People begin to smile more. Shops display new goods. Factories reopen. Public projects create jobs. Cafes fill again, their windows glowing in the evening light. From a distance, this looks like recovery, the fulfillment of promises made during rallies and radio addresses. But recovery and control often walk hand in hand. Prosperity can be a leash. Hope can be a mask. The mood is lighter, but the structure beneath it grows heavier. Civil liberties remain suspended. Opposition parties remain dissolved. Voices remain silent. The country is not healing. It is hardening. Yet optimism can make people blind to the walls quietly rising around them. You hear a man on the tram tell a friend, "Say what you will, things are finally improving." He says it with such relief that you realize something heartbreaking. People will accept almost anything if it means their lives become simpler. The silence between beats. By midsummer, Germany feels fully aligned, not divided, not chaotic, but synchronized, a system of institutions ticking forward in unified rhythm. You walk through a city square at dusk. The street lamps glow. The river flows quietly under a stone bridge. Children chase each other in the fading light. Couples stroll hand in hand. On the surface, it is serene. But beneath the serenity lies an absence. The absence of disagreement. The absence of debate. The absence of the spontaneous disorder that once made public life vibrant. You stop near a small kiosk where a radio is playing softly. The broadcast drifts into the air like warm static. Germany stands united. Germany stands strong. Germany stands renewed. The repetition is gentle, almost musical, and that is what makes it so effective. You listen for a moment, sensing the strange truth this new Germany embodies. When everything aligns, the silence becomes thunderous. The chapter ends here. Jorge. A country fully coordinated. The storm beginning to coil beneath the veneer of stability. Chapter 5. Night of the Long Knives. When power redefined itself. Summer settles over Germany with a heavy, listless heat. The air tastes of dust and new pavement. Fields shimmer in soft waves beneath the sun. Cities feel slower, as though they are exhaling after months of tension. From a distance, it all seems peaceful. But you've learned that in this new Germany, peace often means something else. Not calm, not safety, but the moment when something unseen prepares to shift. You walk through Berlin on a warm June evening. Shadows stretch long along Wilhelmstrasse. Street lamps flicker on one by one. People stroll with unhurried steps, shopkeepers locking their doors, students laughing at private jokes, couples pausing to admire window displays. If you didn't look closely, you might almost believe nothing was brewing beneath the quiet surface. But power rarely moves loudly. It moves at night, in silence, behind doors that close softly and stay closed. And in the summer of 1934, Germany enters such a night. A state full of whispers. Tension begins on the edges. Conversations in cafes feel more guarded. Newspaper articles emphasize unity with an insistence that suggests the opposite. Rumors drift through barracks, offices, railways. Rumors about old allies becoming inconvenient, about rival ambitions within the very movement that seized power. You overhear a man muttering outside a post office. Something is happening, something big. No one asks what he means. People have learned not to be curious. In beer halls, whispers spread about Ernst Röhm and the SA, millions strong, undisciplined, unpredictable. A force once useful for street battles, now too large, too loud, too threatening to the army and to Hitler's vision of control. The tension is palpable, yet invisible. You feel it most in the pauses between conversations, in the way people look over their shoulders before saying anything political, in the way newspapers praise unity while hinting at danger lurking within. A country that once roared with slogans now speaks in whispers, and whispers are the first sign of an approaching purge. A car leaves Berlin at dusk. On June 29, 1934, you stand near the Reich Chancellery as dusk folds softly over the city. A motorcade pulls out, quiet, disciplined, deliberate. No fanfare, no public announcement. The cars glide through the streets like dark shapes drifting through water. You watch one of them pass under a lamppost. For a moment, you see faces inside, expressionless, focused, lit by a faint glow of dashboard lights. Hitler is among them. His eyes are fixed forward, his jaw tight, his posture rigid with purpose. This is not the fiery speaker from the rallies. This is a man preparing to redefine power on his own terms. The motorcade heads south toward Munich, into the quiet heart of Bavaria, into a night that will carve a new meaning into German political life. You watch the last car disappear into the distance. The street feels colder once it's gone. The night opens with a knock. The purge begins not with gunfire, but with footsteps, soft at first, measured, obedient. Doors are knocked upon, names called quietly. Uniforms step through thresholds while neighbors pretend to sleep behind thin walls. Across Germany, Munich, Berlin, Stuttgart, Breslau, Kiel, Hamburg, homes that were safe at sundown are no longer safe by midnight. The SA leadership is arrested swiftly, almost surgically. Men who once marched with pride now sit in shock, hands bound, unable to grasp the new reality forming around them. You stand outside a small hotel in Bad Weersee, watching officers move with tense precision. There is no shouting, no chaos, only the heavy sound of boots on wooden floors and the muffled voices of men awakened abruptly from sleep. The air smells of pine and lake water. The night sky glows faintly with stars. It is tranquil, and that is what makes it terrifying. Power is reasserting itself not through spectacle, but through silence. Orders in the dark. The arrests continue through the night and into the early hours of morning. Phones ring in government offices. Messages are delivered by hand. Lists are checked, updated, expanded. Some names belong to genuine rivals. Others belong to old enemies. Others still belong to people who simply stood in the wrong place at the wrong time. The purge widens. It becomes not just a removal of threats, but an opportunity, a chance to reshape the inner circle, eliminate dissent, and send a message that loyalty is no longer sufficient. It must be absolute. You walk through Berlin's Tiergarten just after dawn. Birds chirp in the foliage. Sunlight filters through the branches in soft golden beams. But soldiers stand at intersections. Not many, just enough to signal that something has shifted. Their faces are neutral, their posture rigid, their eyes scanning quietly. Most civilians do not yet know what has happened. But the animals in the park behave strangely. A flock of pigeons bursts into sudden flight, as if sensing the tension the way they sense storms. Nature often reacts before people do. The official explanation. When the news finally breaks, it does so in carefully arranged pieces. Newspapers release statements that frame the purge as a necessary act, a decisive blow against traitors, conspirators, moral deviants, threats to stability. The language is sharp, moralistic, absolute. Posters appear, speeches are broadcast, and radio announcers talk about heroic action with unwavering calm. But what you notice most is the relief. Yes, relief. People are tired of fear, tired of uncertainty, tired of whispering. The purge, brutal as it is presented as a cleansing, a removal of chaos, a restoration of order. And many accept it. Some even welcome it. A woman at the tram stop says quietly, "Maybe things will be stable now." Her voice is thin, trembling slightly, but the hope in it is genuine. People will endure almost anything if they believe it brings stability, even the erosion of their own freedoms. The army's silence. The reaction that matters most comes not from the public, but from the army. Generals had long feared the SA's unruly power, its millions of members, its radical ambitions, its rivalry with the professional military. When the purge eliminates the SA leadership in one swift stroke, the army does not protest. It breathes. Hitler assures them that the army is the nation's sole military force, that their traditions remain intact, that their loyalty will be rewarded. You stand outside the War Ministry as officers arrive for a meeting. Their uniforms are immaculate, their steps firm yet subdued. Inside, agreements are made. Hands are shaken. The future is exchanged quietly between men who understand the weight of compromise. When they exit, their faces reveal little, but you sense that something immense has been traded. Autonomy for allegiance, tradition for integration, caution for obedience. And with that, the last significant institution capable of resisting the new regime steps into alignment. Gleichschaltung tightens another notch. The atmosphere after the storm. Weeks pass, and the purge becomes not a crisis, but a reference point. People still speak of it, but only in lowered voices. A neighbor mentions a missing acquaintance, then quickly changes the subject. A teacher alludes to the events only indirectly, through remarks about times of necessary firmness. In offices, employees look down when certain names are spoken aloud. And in this atmosphere, a strange thing happens. Life resumes. The markets reopen. Children return to school. Factories hum anew. Cafes fill with quiet chatter. From the outside, the world appears unchanged. But beneath the surface, something has shifted permanently. The fear that once spread in whispers now exists deeper, woven into the fabric of daily thought. People had hoped for stability. They received it. But at the cost of understanding that stability now comes from a single source. You walk along a riverbank at sunset, listening to the faint laughter of people picnicking nearby. The sky glows a soft pink. The water glimmers gently. It looks peaceful. It looks calm. But calm can mean surrender. Calm can mean resignation. Calm can mean the acceptance of something irreversible. The country is not drifting anymore. It is moving with purpose, one man's purpose, toward a horizon that grows darker with each passing month. A leader without rivals. By late 1934, Hitler stands alone atop the political structure. His rivals are gone, his critics silenced, his allies dependent, his enemies erased. The night of the long knives has done more than remove threats. It has solidified a myth that he is decisive, strong, necessary, that the nation depends on him. You stand near the Chancellery one evening as he steps out onto a balcony for a brief appearance. The crowd gathered below is small, not a rally, not a spectacle, but the atmosphere feels charged. People raise their heads. Some applaud softly. Some simply watch in silence. He raises a hand, just slightly, and the crowd reacts as if to a conductor's cue. It is not enthusiasm. It is reflex. The reflex of a nation already trained. The reflex of a nation that no longer distinguishes between stability and submission. The reflex of a nation sliding into the next phase of its transformation. The purge is over. The path ahead is clear. But the darkest turns of this road, the ones that will shake the world, still lie ahead. Chapter 6: The Engineering of Obedience. How a Society Learns to Bow. The year turns, and Germany enters 1935 with a brightness that feels almost unnatural. Shop windows glow with new displays. Factories churn with renewed energy. Railways operate with striking punctuality, their whistles slicing cleanly through morning fog. On the surface, the country looks reborn. But rebirth can be a mask, smooth, polished, designed to hide the machinery beneath. You walk through Berlin on a crisp morning, and the city feels orderly to the point of stillness. Not peaceful, structured. Not calm, choreographed. Germany no longer leans toward change. It has accepted it, absorbed it, conformed to it. The atmosphere carries a strange kind of quiet pride. Banners hung straight, uniforms pressed sharply, slogans painted with fresh coats of paint. But you sense what lies underneath. A society taught not to question, but to echo. This is not the Germany of Weimar. This is a new order, shaped not only by force, but by design. A nation redefined. After the night of the long knives, the government moves with renewed confidence. The boundaries between party and state blur until they become indistinguishable. Laws shift. Definitions shift. Expectations shift. Identity becomes not a private experience, but a public requirement. You walk past a registry office where long lines form, people presenting documents, answering questions, updating records. Their expressions are blank, resigned. They do not argue. They do not hesitate. The bureaucracy now extends into every corner of life. Employment files, housing requests, marriage certificates, religious affiliations, political alignments. Everything is catalogued. Everything is standardized. Everything is used to sort people into categories of belonging or exclusion. The air inside the office smells of ink and damp coats. A clock ticks on a wall. Each tick feels like the sound of a system slotting someone into place. And as people finish their paperwork, they exit with the same quiet acceptance. This is how things are now. Normalization is the most powerful tool of any regime. The language of control. Words change meaning in subtle ways. You hear it in newspapers: renewal, purification, strength, unity, enemy. You hear it on the radio: destiny, people's community, heritage, loyalty. The vocabulary expands like a new dialect, gradually replacing older, gentler language. Resistance becomes treason. Critique becomes decadence. Independence becomes selfishness. Diversity becomes weakness. At a small cafe, you sit near a table where two university students speak in hushed tones. One of them lowers his voice to near silence as he says, "You have to be careful what words you use now." His friend nods, stirring his coffee so vigorously the spoon clinks against the cup. Words have become dangerous not because they are loud, but because they are noticed. And people have learned to speak as though someone is always listening. Education rewritten. You walk into a school one afternoon as children finish their day. They file out in neatly spaced rows, their boots making soft, rhythmic taps against the polished floor. Inside classrooms, maps of Europe have been updated. New textbooks lie open on desks, pages filled with bold symbols, heroic stories, simplified lessons about strength and identity. A teacher erases a chalkboard with long, firm strokes. Her eyes dart occasionally toward the open door, checking who might be passing. She is not afraid of her students. She is afraid of how quickly innocence repeats what it hears. During a break, a boy shows his friend a badge he received for reciting a speech flawlessly. His chest swells with pride. He is not being manipulated, not consciously. He is simply absorbing. Children do not resist structure. Children internalize it, and generations can be shaped long before they know they are being shaped. Exclusion made ordinary. The year 1935 brings new laws, stiff, cold, legalistic, that define who belongs in the people's community and who does not. You read them printed neatly in a newspaper set out on a tram seat. The Nuremberg laws. Words wrapped in legality, sharp as knives. They do not shout. They do not threaten. They simply categorize. And categorization is the beginning of dehumanization. Jewish citizens are redefined not by culture or belief, but by ancestry. Marriage between Jews and non-Jews becomes prohibited. Citizenship becomes conditional. Rights become negotiable. The laws are written with bureaucratic precision, as though they were mere administrative adjustments, the product of meetings, not malice. You observe people reading the news on street corners. Some shake their heads. Some shrug. Some fold the paper quietly and walk away. The reactions differ, but the common thread is chilling. No one screams. Exclusion becomes part of the rhythm of daily life. A small shift, then another, then another. You hear a shopkeeper whisper, "It's not my business." But indifference is the soil in which tragedy grows. Strength through spectacle. Autumn arrives, and with it, the grand rallies. You find yourself again near Nuremberg, not within the crowd, but at the far edge of the field where the torches burn in precise rows. The sky glows with the beams of massive searchlights, their white pillars stretching upward like a cathedral made of light. People march in tight columns, banners snapping in the wind. The choreography is flawless, thousands moving as though guided by a single breath. From a distance, it looks almost beautiful, symmetrical, fluid, hypnotic. But beauty can be a tool. The spectacle is designed to overwhelm the senses, to replace questions with awe. A child on his father's shoulders gasps at the lights. A woman covers her heart with her hand, eyes wet with emotion. A soldier stands rigidly, chest expanding with pride. You remain still, watching. The power of spectacle is not merely in the display. It is in the message it implants gently, almost imperceptibly. This is unity. This is destiny. This is the future. In a world craving stability, spectacle becomes truth. The private becomes public. In Germany now, privacy is a delicate illusion. You walk through an apartment building where doors stay closed but ears stay open. Neighbors speak softly in stairwells. Conversations pause when footsteps echo down the hall. Windows remain slightly ajar, not for fresh air, but for listening. Informants blend seamlessly into daily life. A co-worker, a family friend, a student, a grocer, not malicious, just vigilant. The regime does not need millions of enforcers. It needs millions of people uncertain about who might be listening. You watch a man tear a page from his diary, rip it in half, then in half again before throwing it in the stove. His hands tremble, though the words he wrote were harmless. But harmlessness is subjective in a world where offense is defined by the powerful. Germany has become a place where silence is the safest form of speech. the Church and the State. Even faith bends. You enter a small church on a quiet Sunday morning. Candles flicker gently. Dust dances in beams of light pouring through stained glass windows. The pastor speaks softly, reading from Scripture. But then the tone changes. He shifts to national themes. Unity, loyalty, obedience. His voice becomes heavier, his words aligned with messages heard everywhere else. Some congregants bow their heads. Some shift uncomfortably, but none walk out. The church has not been destroyed. It has been absorbed. Its language softened. Its autonomy thinned. Its purpose redirected. Sacred spaces remain, but the lines between sacred and political blur until they lose meaning. The illusion of prosperity. By the end of 1935, Germany appears to flourish. Factories run at full efficiency. Employment rises. Roads are built. Public enthusiasm grows. You stand on a bridge overlooking a construction site where workers pour concrete for a gleaming new roadway. Their movements are rhythmic, confident. Their faces are focused but calm. It looks like progress, and in some ways it is. But progress can be a cage disguised as opportunity. Rearmament, hidden at first, now becomes increasingly open. Military parades return. Factories produce weapons. Budgets tilt quietly toward war. But war seems far away. Impossible even. People are too relieved to question the source of the new prosperity. Too hopeful to wonder what it might cost later. A woman at a bakery says to the baker, "Things are better now. Whatever he's doing, it's working." The baker nods. And you understand something quietly devastating. When life becomes easier, people rarely ask why. A country without edges. By the start of 1936, Germany has lost its roughness, not in economy, but in expression. Everything aligns. Schools, newspapers, churches, local councils, youth organizations, courtrooms, businesses. Dissent is not debated, it is erased. Difference is not tolerated, it is categorized. Questions are not answered, they are discouraged. This new Germany feels smooth, polished, seamless, but only because the edges have been sanded away. You walk through a quiet street as evening settles. A light snow begins to fall. Windows glow warmly. A family laughs behind a curtain. The smell of roasted chestnuts drifts through the air. It looks peaceful. But peace can hide the most dangerous transformations, because it makes people believe that nothing is wrong. You stop for a moment, feeling the snow melt on your coat. Germany is no longer searching for its identity. It has been given one, and the cost of that identity will soon reveal itself in ways no one is prepared to face. The road to war is not paved with gunfire. It is paved with silence. Chapter 7. Kristallnacht, the night the glass remembered. Calm, poetic, silent devastation. Night descends on Germany with an eerie clarity. The kind of night where the cold presses against windows. The kind of night where sound travels too far. The kind where the moon hangs so still it feels like it's listening. You find yourself walking through a quiet street on the evening of November 9th, 1938. Autumn lies heavy on the rooftops. Leaves skitter across cobblestones in small, restless arcs. The air smells of wood smoke and early winter. If you didn't know what was coming, You would think nothing unusual was unfolding. People finish their dinners. Lights glow softly behind curtains. A tram rattles past with a lonely bell. But beneath the calm surface, something trembles. A low, tense vibration in the atmosphere, as if the country itself is holding its breath. You can almost feel history leaning forward. A spark in the dark. The trigger comes from far away. A young Jewish man, desperate and grieving, fires a gun in Paris. A German official dies. Grief becomes outrage. Outrage becomes opportunity. Leaders gather behind closed doors. Words sharpen. Plans align. And as the evening settles, quiet orders begin to ripple outward. Not shouted. Not announced. Just released like ink into water. You hear the first break of glass before you see anything. A crisp, delicate shatter in the distance, like a single star exploding somewhere overhead. The sound echoes strangely through the still night air. You pause. Listen. Another shatter. Then another. Windows breaking in different parts of the city. Not from accident. Not from weather. But from instruction. The night has cracked open. Streets fill with flame. You move toward the center of the city as small crowds gather. Not panicked. Not confused. Just watching. Some with unease. Some with curiosity. Some with a terrible sort of approval. Flames rise from a building ahead. Not a raging inferno, but a slow, deliberate fire. A synagogue. Its windows glow from within, light flickering across its stone facade, like a candle held too close to paper. Firefighters stand nearby, but do not intervene. Their hoses lie coiled, unused. They were told to protect the surrounding structures, not the synagogue itself. You watch the flames lick upward, quiet, methodical, as if consuming memory rather than wood. A man beside you whispers, "Is this allowed?" No one answers. In Germany tonight, silence is a form of permission. A night of shattered glass. You turn a corner, and the ground crunches beneath your feet. Glass. Small pieces. Large shards. Slivers that catch the light of street lamps and glow like frost. The sidewalks glitter with a strange, unreal beauty, as though the city has been dusted in stars. But the beauty is deceptive. These are the windows of Jewish shops, homes, schools, offices. You see a tailor's shop, its display overturned, fabrics spilled like fallen banners across the floor, a bakery window smashed, bread scattered on the tiles, the smell of yeast mixing with the cold night air, a bookstore with its shelves toppled, pages floating like frightened birds. The destruction is not wild. It is precise. Each window broken with the same rhythm, glass exploding outward, falling in sheets, settling in a sparkling carpet that the morning sun will reveal in stark, painful clarity. You walk slowly, each step sending a faint tinkling sound into the air. It feels like walking across memory. Searching for safety. In alleyways and side streets, families wait in doorways, Jewish families holding their coats tight, unsure whether to flee or stay still. But where does one flee at midnight, when the threat comes from every direction? A woman whispers to her husband, "Maybe we should go to my sister's house." He shakes his head, eyes cast downward. No house is safe tonight. You don't see their faces clearly. Only outlines, shapes, shadows. Their fear is quiet, contained, a fear too deep for screaming. Across the city, thousands face the same impossible questions. Should we hide? Should we run? Should we wait? But the night offers no guidance. Only glass, and fire, and footsteps. Always the footsteps. The arrests begin. The destruction of buildings is only the beginning. Across Germany and Austria, doors are forced open before dawn. Men are taken from their beds, while families cling to stairwells and railings. Arrests unfold without shouts, without explanations, just names read from lists, commands given in clipped tones, instructions carried out with efficiency. You stand near a small apartment building as a group of men are led out, coats hastily buttoned, hair still mussed from sleep. The street is quiet. The moon hangs low. A dog barks once and then falls silent. The men do not resist. A resistance would be futile, a cry unheard. They step into trucks that rumble away into the night, disappearing down roads lined with glass. Their families remain behind, faces pale in the half-light, hands pressed against the cold doorframe. A child asks, "When will Papa come back?" But no one knows the answer. A nation watches. Not everyone participates in the violence. Most simply watch. Some from open windows, some from darkened rooms, some from the edges of streets where they pretend to be passing by. You stand among them, feeling the weight of this collective witnessing, the heaviness of people who know something terrible is happening, but who have been taught that to speak is to endanger themselves. Fear is a leash. Silence is its collar. Yet among the watchers, you notice something else, a numbness that settles over the crowd. People inhale the scene as if it is weather, as if the violence has descended like a storm that cannot be blamed on any single hand. A man mutters, "It's not my business." Another says, "I don't agree, but what can we do?" A third whispers, "Best to stay quiet." Quiet is the only safe place left, and in a nation that has been trained to obey, quiet becomes a refuge and a prison. Ash in the morning light. When dawn finally breaks, the city looks surreal. Smoke drifts across rooftops. Ash clings to windowsills. The sky glows faintly pink, as though blushing at what transpired beneath it. You walk through the streets now illuminated by morning light. The glass that glittered under street lamps has turned dull and grey. Sweeping crews begin clearing debris, their brooms pushing aside not only glass, but the remnants of normal life. Some people step around the shattered storefronts carefully. Some hurry past with eyes averted. Some linger, staring at the destruction as if seeing it from a distance. A Jewish shop owner stands before the ruins of his store. He holds the key in his hand, but the lock hangs broken. He does not cry. He does not shout. He simply stands there, breathing slowly, as though trying to understand how one night could change the meaning of home. The morning feels colder than night ever did. The government responds. Later that day, newspapers appear with headlines that twist the truth into a shape that suits the regime. Spontaneous outburst of public anger. righteous indignation, necessary response. The language is clinical, emotionless, designed to absolve the state. But behind the printed words, you know the truth. Nothing about this night was spontaneous. Nothing about it was uncontrolled. Nothing about it was accidental. The destruction was coordinated. The arrests were planned. The silence was enforced. And the message is unmistakable. This is what happens when a society decides who belongs and who does not. The weight of the night. As evening returns, you stand once more in the streets of Berlin. The glass has been swept, the fires extinguished, the crowds dispersed. But the night feels different now, heavier, older, unsettled. A world has tilted, not completely, not yet, but enough that you can feel the slope beneath your feet. Kristallnacht is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of clarity, a declaration of intent, a line crossed without hesitation. The road to war has always been long, but tonight it becomes irreversible. You look down at the small crystals of glass still caught between cobblestones, fragments the sweepers missed. They catch the lamplight in tiny, trembling sparks. The night remembers them. History remembers them. Glass remembers everything. And the silence that follows is the heaviest silence you've heard yet. Chapter 8. The World That Looked Away. Anschluss, Munich, and the drift toward catastrophe. Winter fades, and Germany steps into 1938 with a quiet, unsettling confidence. The streets feel smoother beneath your shoes, as though the country has paved over its own fractures. Trains run on time. Factories hum steadily. Public squares fill with measured optimism. But beneath the surface, the machinery of expansion is already in motion. Germany is no longer content to realign itself. It is preparing to realign the world. You walk through a government district one pale spring morning and feel it in the air. Not tension, but purpose. Doors open with crisp efficiency. Officials stride down corridors with folders pressed tightly against their chests. Telephones ring with sharp intent. The country has formed itself into a fist. Now it begins to close. Austria. The quiet surrender. The first move is toward a place where German is spoken, where borders blur easily in memory and myth. Austria. You travel south as winter gives way to thaw. The Alps rise pale and immense, their ridges dusted with late-season snow. Villages appear like clusters of matchboxes beneath mountain shadows. For years, Austria has been fragile, its government unsteady, its economy thin, its politics fractured. Germany senses opportunity. You hear the radio static grow heavier as news of a plebiscite approaches, a vote to determine Austria's future. But under pressure, under threat, under the looming weight of its larger neighbor, the vote never happens. Instead, in March 1938, German troops cross the border. You stand beside a road as columns of soldiers approach, not with gunfire, not with violence, but with flowers thrown by crowds. Women step forward with bouquets. Children wave flags. Men salute with fervent eyes. The soldiers look startled by the welcome. This is not conquest in the old sense, but absorption. A nation swallowed whole in a single breath. You watch an elderly man on a balcony lower his head and whisper, "Not all of us wanted this," but his voice is too soft to carry over the cheers. In Vienna, music drifts from open windows as banners unfurl across public buildings. The city gleams under the orchestration of celebration. Unity, reunion, homecoming, words repeated endlessly, softening the truth beneath them. Austria did not join Germany. Germany consumed Austria, and the world watched, hesitant, silent, hoping peace could be preserved with quiet concessions. The world blinks. After the Anschluss, foreign capitals react with alarm, but not with action. London debates. Paris hesitates. Washington observes. You see diplomats pacing inside smoky rooms, papers spread across tables, maps marked with small circles of concern. But concern without conviction is weightless. The world is still bruised from the First World War. No one wants to believe another might be coming, and Germany senses the reluctance, tastes it like sweetness on the air, and prepares its next move. The Sudetenland question. Czechoslovakia stands alone in the center of Europe, a young democracy surrounded by old ambitions. In its western region, the Sudetenland, mountains, forests, small towns, a large German-speaking population lives uneasily under increasing pressure. You walk along a Sudeten street one summer afternoon. Shops stand neat and orderly. Children chase stray dogs through alleyways. Mountains rise in the distance like silent guardians. Nothing here suggests imminent conflict, but propaganda flows across the border like smoke. Radio broadcasts whisper of oppression. Newspapers stoke outrage. Tensions rise. And then, without warning, the region becomes the focus of the world. You picture diplomats boarding late-night trains, suitcases in hand, faces tight with exhaustion. A crisis grows, not from the ground, but from the ambitions of men who see land as chessboard squares. Munich. September 1938. You stand near a radio shop in Berlin as people crowd around the window. Dozens gather, faces close, breath misting against the glass. Inside, the radio crackles with reports from Munich, a city turned stage for the fate of a nation. Britain, France, Germany, Italy. 4 powers, 4 signatures. No seat for Czechoslovakia at its own dismemberment. You listen to the static as agreements are reached behind closed doors. The announcer's voice rises with triumph. Peace is secured. A cheer ripples through the crowd. Some clap. Some sigh with relief. Some look upward, as though thanking the sky. You watch a man whisper, "At least there will be no war. Hope is a fragile shield. The Sudetenland will be handed over. Czech defenses will be dismantled. Borders redrawn. All in the name of peace." You walk away from the crowd, sensing the quiet tragedy settling beneath the celebration. A small democracy has been abandoned. A dictator has been encouraged, and the world has mistaken appetite for stability. The Munich Agreement is not peace. It is postponement, and postponement is sometimes the costliest choice of all. The disappearance of Czechoslovakia. Barely 6 months later, the truth reveals itself. Germany moves again, not subtly, not indirectly, but openly, into Prague. No vote, no negotiation, no justification beyond convenience. You stand on a Prague street as German troops march through the old town. Their boots echo off stone buildings older than the idea of Germany itself. Citizens watch from balconies, their expressions cloaked in disbelief and bitterness. A cold mist settles over the city, muting the colors, making the occupation feel like a dream, or a nightmare that refuses to fully form. Czechoslovakia dissolves, its democracy erased in quiet strokes. The world does more than blink this time. It looks inward, terrified, ashamed. Appeasement has failed. The storm grows, and you feel something shift, not in Germany, but in the world's understanding of Germany. The mask slips. The intentions become clear. The patience of other nations begins to fracture. But the momentum now is too powerful to stop easily. The axis aligns. In Rome, Mussolini admires the speed of Germany's advances. He sees opportunity in partnership, strength in alignment, destiny in union. In Tokyo, militarists watch European hesitation and learn from it. Expansion thrives when opposition fears its own memories. What once were individual ambitions now begin to orbit each other. You imagine the world as a vast sky, with new constellations forming, dark shapes aligning silently. Germany, Italy, Japan. Three separate storms, pulling toward a shared center. You hear diplomats speak of spheres of influence, balance of power, regional ambitions. But beneath the language lies a simple truth. The world is dividing, and the divide is widening with every move. Rearmament no longer hidden. By 1938 to 1939, Germany no longer disguises its rearmament. Parades become more frequent. New uniforms appear. Factories produce weapons openly. You stand near a train station as a shipment of artillery passes through, covered in tarps, but unmistakably heavy, unmistakably new. Workers watch with expressionless faces, some proud, some uneasy. No one speaks. In the countryside, airfields expand, barracks multiply. Soldiers train in formations that stretch across the horizon. The illusion of peace has ended. The preparation for war is no longer a rumor. It is the rhythm of daily life. And the world begins to feel like a chamber slowly filling with smoke. A pact of shadows. August 1939. You stand in a Berlin street as newspapers sell out faster than vendors can stack them. A new headline. Germany and the Soviet Union sign non-aggression pact. Shock ripples through the public. Two ideological enemies now bound by convenience. But the pact is not just diplomacy. It is a map. Secret protocols divide Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Borders are pre-drawn. Futures decided without the knowledge of those who live within them. You picture officials in Moscow and Berlin, drawing lines across countries as though sketching patterns on sand. And as you read the newsprint, as the ink bleeds faintly into your fingertips, you realize the truth. The pact does not bring peace. It removes the final barrier to war. Germany is now free to make its next move. The dawn before the storm. Summer ends. Autumn approaches with a strange clarity. The air sharpens. The leaves turn early. Nations call up reserves. Diplomats send urgent telegrams. Newspapers fill with anxious speculation. You stand at the edge of a Polish village. Fields stretching outward in golden rows. Birds circling slowly in the distance. The land is peaceful, achingly peaceful. Children chase each other through tall grass. Farmers harvest their crops. The smell of earth rises in warm currents. Nothing here suggests that the world is about to rupture. But somewhere to the west, engines idle. Aircraft sit ready. Maps are folded into officers' pockets. The road to war has narrowed to a single point. And you feel it. The gentlest shift in the wind. The softest tremor beneath your feet. The quiet before thunder. History is holding its breath again. The storm is now unavoidable. Chapter 9. September 1st. When the world finally shattered. Dawn rises slowly over Eastern Europe, the light hesitant, pale, almost shy. It glows along the horizon like a whisper of gold catching on the edges of distant fields. The countryside looks peaceful, far too peaceful for what is about to unfold. You're standing beside a narrow Polish road in the early morning chill. Mist clings to the grass. Birdsong drifts through the air in soft, uneven notes. A farmhouse in the distance exhales a thin curl of smoke from its chimney. A dog barks lazily at nothing in particular. The world feels suspended, caught between night and day, between what has been and what will soon become impossible to undo. Somewhere far to the west, engines rumble like a distant, approaching storm. You feel it before you hear it, a vibration in the soil, a pulse running through the roots of the land, a shift, a moment dividing one era from another, and then the first sound arrives, not loud, not flamboyant, but decisive, the low drone of aircraft. It rolls across the sky like a long, dark sigh. The first strike. The sun has barely risen when shadows pass overhead. Fast, mechanical, deliberate. Planes sweep across the horizon, their silhouettes sharp against the dawn. They fly in tight formation, moving with the assured rhythm of a decision already made. You watch them pass, their engines humming with cold purpose. Then, a flash in the distance. No explosion yet, just light. A brief, unnatural bloom on the edge of the morning. Seconds later, sound follows. A deep, echoing thud that makes the fields tremble. Bombs fall on Weilen. A hospital. A market square. A town just waking. You don't see the blast directly, only the smoke rising, curling upward into the sky like a new, unwanted pillar of morning. A farmer nearby stops in his tracks. His hands fall to his sides. His mouth opens just slightly, as though searching for a word he does not know how to form. The dog that barked lazily before now runs beneath a wagon and hides. The day has changed, and with it, the world. The invasion unfolds. Moments later, engines roar from the ground as German tanks cross the border. Metal beasts grinding through soil, their treads leaving long scars in the fields. You see them from a hilltop, rolling in steady waves, moving as if pulled forward by an invisible force. Soldiers march behind them, boots thudding in unison, faces unreadable beneath steel helmets. There is no hesitation, no confusion, no chaos. This is not an improvisation. It is a script rehearsed to perfection. You stand still, listening to the clatter of metal, the distant echo of artillery, the strange quiet that fills the space between each impact. Poland is being invaded, not declared upon, not negotiated with, not threatened, invaded. The simplicity of the word makes it heavier. Civilians in the path. You walk through a small Polish village just as families begin to flee. Women tie bundles of clothes with shaking hands. Men lift children onto wagons. Elderly parents shuffle toward the road, their steps small, their breaths uneven. The air smells of cut grain and smoke. A horse whinnies nervously as planes rumble overhead. A mother whispers to her son, "Stay close." Her voice is calm, but her eyes give her away. People look east, not west, towards safety, however temporary, away from the storm that approaches with steel and fire. A man standing near a well mutters, "It has started." His words float into the air, soft, resigned, as if acknowledging a truth long feared. He is not surprised, only devastated. Blitzkrieg. The strategy is new, terrifying in its speed, unlike anything Europe has seen before. Planes attack from above. Tanks smash through defenses. Infantry advance rapidly behind them. Blitzkrieg. Lightning war. But the word does not capture the atmosphere. The silence that follows each strike. The stunned breath of civilians watching their world unravel. The eerie precision with which the destruction unfolds. You stand by a railway line as a German armored train thunders past. The ground vibrates beneath your shoes. The rails hum with metallic energy. In the distance, telegraph wires snap in sparks, cutting communication lines, isolating towns before they can call for help. The invasion moves like a tide, not pausing, not faltering, not turning back. You can almost feel the weight of inevitability bearing down across the landscape. Warsaw holds its breath. By early September, the capital braces itself. You walk through Warsaw's narrow streets, the smell of fresh bread still lingering from early morning markets, children's chalk drawings marking the pavement, posters peeling from old stone walls. But the energy has changed. A nervous hum beneath the routine. People glance upward more often. Radios murmur updates. Voices clipped and tense. Barricades rise in intersections, hastily built from sandbags and overturned carts. When the first bombs fall on Warsaw, the city does not break. It absorbs the shock. Like a giant exhaling through pain. You stand near the Vistula River as smoke rises on the horizon. Ash drifts gently through the air, falling like an unnatural snow. People run, then stop running, then gather in doorways to watch flames in the distance. Fear is tempered by disbelief, a disbelief that this century, so full of promises, could descend into fire again. But it has. The world responds. On September 3rd, 2 days after the invasion, radios across Europe crackle with a message that feels both inevitable and surreal. Britain declares war. France declares war. You stand in a Berlin cafe when the announcement airs. The room falls silent. A young man looks up from his newspaper, blinks slowly, as if waking from a long, distorted dream. A woman puts down her cup and presses her fingers to her lips. No one cheers. No one shouts. The words, "We are at war," drift through the air like a cold draft. In Paris, people gather in streets, eyes full of dread, voices soft. In London, sirens wail for the first time, not in attack, but in rehearsal. A generation that survived one war now realizes it must face another. You can almost feel the weight of history settling across the continent, heavy as a winter blanket. Poland alone. Despite the declarations, the early days of the war remain strangely quiet in Western Europe. Soldiers mobilize. Borders are fortified. Bunkers are stocked. But the fighting, the true violence, remains in the east. Poland stands alone against a storm it cannot stop. You walk through a forest path outside Lublin. The trees sway, whispering to one another in the wind. The ground is littered with fallen leaves. In the distance, you hear gunfire, not constant, but rhythmic, like the slow tolling of a bell. Civilians hide in the forest, huddled around campfires that cast small orange halos in the dusk. A man murmurs, "It will be over soon." He does not mean victory. He means collapse. And collapse comes faster than anyone expected, because on September 17th, a new shadow moves from the east. The Soviet Union invades. 2 armies, 2 directions, no escape. Poland splits under the weight of history, and the world gains a chilling revelation. This war will not obey borders. It will devour them. A month that changed everything. By early October, Poland falls. The speed of it startles even those who planned it. Europe looks at the map and sees a hole where a nation once stood. You walk near the ruins of a train depot in western Poland. Twisted rails glint in the pale afternoon sun. Ash drifts across empty platforms. A single suitcase lies overturned in the dirt, its contents scattered by wind. The silence is immense. Not the silence of peace. The silence after something breaks. As you stand there, feeling the wind move through the wreckage, you understand something deeply. This is only the beginning. The world has entered a new era, one shaped by force, by fear, by ambition unrestrained. The road to war is not a road anymore. It is a plunge, and every nation, every person, every life will feel the tremor. A world forever altered. As autumn deepens, night comes earlier each day. You walk through a Polish forest at twilight, the air cool, the trees tall and silent. Somewhere far away, you hear the hum of an engine, the faint rumble of artillery, the distant notes of a song sung by soldiers around a campfire. The war has begun. The old world has ended. The next chapter of history looms like a dark ridge on the horizon. You pause, listening to the wind move through the branches. It whispers a truth that feels ancient. Wars do not begin with explosions. They begin with silence, with the quiet acceptance of small cruelties, with the world looking away, with the belief that storms pass if we pretend not to see them. But storms do not pass. They grow. And tonight, as the last light fades behind the trees, you understand. Humanity has stepped into the fire again. The night breathes deeply, as though bracing itself for what is to come. The world prepares to endure. Chapter 10. The Machinery of Total War. How a regime turns society into a weapon. The machinery of total war rarely begins with weapons. It begins with quiet orders, delivered in envelopes stamped with eagles and seals, slipped under office doors before dawn, opened by men and women who glance around before unfolding the pages. It begins with paperwork, the dull, administrative shape of power. Outside, the world appears unchanged. Trams still clatter along their rails. Shopkeepers still sweep their thresholds. Children still walk to school with satchels that bump against their knees. But beneath all of this, you can feel the tension tightening, a slow constriction disguised as routine. You watch the city from a high window, factories humming, trains rolling, crowds flowing like quiet rivers. And you feel it. The air itself has started to move differently. Not violently, not yet, but with deliberate purpose, like a gear beginning to turn. The soft reorganization. Total war begins with a soft reorganization, an unseen reshuffling of priorities, that moves through society like a draft of cold air under a locked door. In Germany, ministries issue new quotas before sunrise. Factory boards are rearranged. Supervisors read updated instructions in break rooms that smell of grease and coffee. Schedules stretch. Hours lengthen. It is not announced to the public with fanfare. No marching bands. No declarations. The shift is quieter than that. You see it in the way a machinist picks up his tools, with a slightly heavier motion. You see it in the way rail workers glance at their watches, as longer trains roll in, their engines chuffing urgently in the morning fog. A single factory whistle becomes the rhythm of an entire district. The town rises with it, sleeps with it, breathes with it. Behind every shift in production is a shift in silence. People stop asking certain questions. They stop lingering in doorways. They move with the current, as if stepping sideways might draw unwanted eyes. Total war is not built on enthusiasm. It is built on compliance, layer by layer, until the layers become walls. You see the walls rising everywhere, not of stone, but of obedience. The factories that fed the storm. Factories become the beating heart of the new order. At dawn, steam rises from chimneys in long pale ribbons. Steel doors roll upward with a metallic sigh. German male machinists enter in small groups, lunch pails swinging, boots striking sparks from cobblestones. Inside, the air is thick with heat and iron dust. Rows of lathes and presses line the floor like iron sentinels. Belts slap against pulleys. Gears grind. Hammers fall. The symphony of industrial force begins anew each day. You watch from a catwalk above the floor. Lights flicker white along the ceiling, casting long shadows beneath the moving belts. The workers rarely speak, not because supervisors forbid it, but because the tempo of the machines leaves little space for anything but breathing and work. Every new order from Berlin turns the machines faster. Every victory on the radio adds pressure to the furnaces. Every failure doubles the demands. Metal is shaped into parts that will be assembled far away, combined with other parts, from other towns, other hands, other lives. A vast, interconnected storm, being built piece by piece, in places that look ordinary. You watch sparks leap in small bursts. They look like stars caught in a machine's teeth. The workers blink as they fly past. They do not look up. The hands that filled the gaps. Total war absorbs more than factories. It absorbs people, their time, their skill, their quiet willingness to keep going. As men leave for the front, gaps appear everywhere. In farms, in warehouses, in post offices, in the very veins of daily life. Those gaps are filled quickly. German female clerks replace absent office workers, stamping forms with steady hands inside long, echoing corridors. Polish female laborers, requisitioned or transported, sort coal beside rail yards, their coats thin against the wind. French and Czech male laborers repair track beneath winter skies, their breath rising in long, sorrowful plumes. None of them chose this work. The machinery chose them. You watch them through a train window, a group of Central European female workers, lining up outside a requisitioned factory, their shoulders hunched, their eyes lowered against the cold. A German male guard stands nearby, hands clasped behind his back, coat flapping in the wind. There is no shouting, no violence, just quiet movement, people stepping into place, like pieces sliding on a board, whose rules they did not write. Total war consumes labor, the way a furnace consumes coal, and the line never stops. The architecture of obedience. Total war requires something more than labor and machinery. It requires a shape, an architecture, that guides the movement of millions. You see it in the buildings, large, imposing structures, with high windows and polished floors. The Ministry of Armaments, the Office of Rationing, the Central Bureau of Planning. German male officials walk briskly down long hallways, papers tucked under arms, shadows stretched across tile. Their footsteps echo sharply, the sound of authority carried forward. Inside meeting rooms, chalk squeaks across blackboards, as production quotas are recalculated. Graphs climb in steep, urgent lines. Maps are marked with pins of red and blue. No one raises their voice. No one needs to. The architecture does the speaking. When you stand in a corridor, you can feel the building itself, pressing against your ribs, a space designed to elevate the state, above the individual. Even the air seems organized. In this world, efficiency is virtue, doubt is weakness, silence is survival, and the walls listen. The propaganda that smoothed the edges. Total war must convince, must soothe, must explain the inexplicable, with words that sound almost gentle. In Germany, posters appear on brick walls, like leaves after rainfall, overnight, numerous, clinging to corners where light catches them. They never use the symbols you expect. Not here, not now. Instead, they show silhouettes of workers in heroic poses, fields turning gold beneath tractors, hands reaching upward as if grasping a shared future. The message is simple. The machinery is your purpose. Your labor is your patriotism. Your silence is your contribution. You see German male officers distributing leaflets in town squares, their gestures calm, their coats immaculate. Civilians gather quietly, heads tilted, eyes moving from line to line, as if reading instructions on how to breathe. Inside cinemas, newsreels flicker across screens, grainy images of factories, workers, marches, flags blurred by motion, crowds rippling like fields in wind. People watch in silence, their faces illuminated by pale light, their expressions unreadable. Propaganda does not shout. Not anymore. It whispers. It persuades. It lingers. It tells people that the machinery is necessary, that efficiency is security, that obedience is protection, and piece by piece, the machinery tightens. Rationing and the quiet hunger. As the war expands, resources contract, bread becomes thinner, meat disappears first, butter follows, sugar becomes a luxury spoken of, like an old friend who moved away. German female clerks issue ration cards in long lines, their fingers stamping ink onto stiff paper. People shuffle forward slowly, hands tucked into coat sleeves, eyes drifting to empty shelves. You watch a market stall, where a single crate of potatoes is divided with mathematical precision. Shoppers count coins, with a care usually reserved for prayers. There is no chaos, no shouting, no riots. The hunger is quiet, disciplined, managed. Total war does not allow hunger to become visible. It allows just enough for people to keep moving, and they do, because the machinery requires movement. The railways that stretched the war across a continent. Railways become arteries. They pulse with cargo, supplies, troops, equipment, hope, desperation. German male railway workers signal trains through fog with lanterns raised high. The stations echo with metallic echoes, pistons, brakes, whistles, the steady clatter of cars coupling. You stand on a platform, watching a long freight train roll past, covered wagons swaying, doors bolted, chains rattling softly. The air tastes of coal smoke and cold metal. Rail networks stretch from Berlin to Warsaw, to Minsk, to Kiev, threads pulled taut across a map that grows colder with each kilometer. Every mile of track is a promise and a threat. The machinery of war moves on steel. Surveillance as a form of weather. Total war needs information. It requires knowing who speaks, who doubts, who resists. Neighbors turn into quiet observers. Colleagues measure their words carefully. Men in tailored coats watch crowds from doorways, their expressions neutral, their presence unmistakable. You walk through a narrow Berlin street at night. Windows glow faintly behind curtains. Shadows shift. A German male official stands at the corner, clipboard under his arm, breath rising in thin, disciplined clouds. He is not here to threaten. He is here to notice. Surveillance becomes a form of weather, always present, always shifting, always something to dress against. People fold their shoulders inward. Conversations shorten. The machinery tightens another gear. When the machinery begins to groan, even the strongest machinery strains eventually. Factories report shortages. Railways grow overloaded. Workers fall ill under impossible quotas. Ration lines lengthen. Officials whisper about setbacks on distant fronts. You see the first cracks, not in speeches or decrees, but in the eyes of German male laborers, whose hands tremble after long shifts. You see it in a Central European female worker, who pauses at her sewing machine, pressing fingertips to her temples, before returning to her work. You see it in the empty shelves, that stay empty longer than usual, in the flickering streetlights, that go unrepaired, in the trains that arrive 5 minutes late, then 10, then 20. The machinery of total war is vast, but even vast machinery groans under the weight of an unwinnable pace. You feel it in the air, a low tension, an almost audible hum, like the sound of a bridge under strain. The system keeps moving, but the rhythm is faltering, even if few dare to admit it. The machinery continues, but something has shifted, a faint change in tone, like a long-held breath, finally trembling. The world outside Germany has begun to notice, not with shock, not with sudden alarm, but with a slow, dawning clarity that moves through capitals and villages alike. Storms do not explode. They gather, and the world is now listening to the sound of a storm being built. Chapter 11. The World Responds. How silence turned into recognition, and recognition into resolve. Storms do not arrive all at once. They send warnings first, small tremors, shifts in pressure, distant rumbles that most people mistake for something ordinary. You stand on a quiet shoreline, waves brushing the sand with slow, patient strokes. Across the water, the horizon glows faintly. The world feels suspended, waiting. This chapter is about that waiting, the years when the world sensed what was coming, yet hesitated, hoped, delayed, whispered, debated, and finally understood. A global response does not begin with armies. It begins with awareness, and awareness spreads like light, touching one window at a time. The neighbors who watched the storm. The first responses to fascism didn't come from distant powers. They came from neighbors, the countries closest to the gathering shadow. In Prague, Czechoslovak female teachers write nervous letters home about the speeches growing sharper across the border. Radio broadcasts twist through static, carrying words spoken in tones that feel colder each week. In Vienna cafes, Austrian male intellectuals argue quietly over newspapers, their voices low, their coffee cooling untouched. They see the direction of the wind. They recognize its scent. In Warsaw, Polish female postal clerks pass telegrams to each other, hands brushing, eyes holding for a moment longer than necessary. Silent acknowledgement of danger drifting closer. Everywhere in Central Europe, there is a sense of tightening, not yet panic, but a collective inhalation, as though millions feel a weather pattern shifting, even if they cannot yet name it. You walk through these cities in memory, hearing the soft rumble beneath their ordinary days. The world responds first, with nervous attention. Britain hears the echoes. Across the Channel, Britain listens. Late at night in London, Lamplight glows behind heavy curtains. Inside cramped offices, British male civil servants review reports. From embassies in Berlin, Vienna, Budapest. The tone is cautious, the language understated, but the meaning is unmistakable. You stand outside the Foreign Office, as rain slips along the dark stone walls, in long, shimmering trails. You picture the scene inside, maps unfurled, notes detailed, tea cooling in neglected cups. British female analysts whisper theories. In corridors lined with portraits of older wars, British male intelligence officers mark certain names, with pencil strokes just dark enough to signal interest. The British public senses something too. In pubs and on street corners, people lean close, speaking in half sentences, as though afraid the full truth might rupture the air. Even as the government hesitates, the public grows uneasy. The world responds with quiet skepticism. France feels the weight of memory. France listens differently. France remembers the trenches. France remembers the mud, the thunder, the silence after shellfire stops, and the world feels hollow. In Paris, French male veterans sit on park benches, with coats buttoned tight, watching pigeons scatter near their shoes. When they read the newspapers, their brows crease. They know what rising certainty looks like. French female shopkeepers follow political developments, with an instinct older than logic, a memory of scarcity, loss, and the fragile peace that followed. Inside the Chamber of Deputies, debate is sharp, agonized, weighted with fear of repeating the past. The French response is shaped by ghosts. You walk along the Seine at dusk, as streetlights flicker to life. One by one, the river reflects them gently, as though trying to soften their glow. France watches the storm, with old, aching familiarity. The United States watches from across an ocean. Across the Atlantic, the United States sits at a distance, geographically safe, emotionally cautious. In small-town diners, American male factory workers fold newspapers to read foreign headlines they do not want to understand. In New York apartments, Jewish female immigrants write letters to relatives in Europe with trembling hands. Across universities, American male professors discuss foreign policy in slow, careful tones. Isolationist sentiment runs deep. People remember the last war, like a wound that never fully closed. You imagine standing in a Midwestern field, under vast, open skies, wind running through tall crops. It feels far from Europe, far from smoke and speeches, and marching boots. But even here, disturbances are felt. Radio hosts shift their tone. Editorials sharpen. Diplomats send increasingly urgent cables. The United States responds with uneasy detachment that slowly, quietly erodes. The underground responds first. The loudest condemnations come from the quietest places: basements, back rooms, attics, warehouses by night. In Germany itself, dissidents meet in cramped apartments, near Berlin's river canals. German male intellectuals whisper over typewriters, with blankets pressed against doors, to muffle the sound of each keystroke. German female activists pass leaflets, folded into newspapers, so discreetly that the exchange looks like nothing more than a friend handing another a spare coin. In Prague, Czech male students distribute coded messages in university hallways, where chalk dust still lingers from afternoon lectures. In Amsterdam, Dutch female resistance members hide ink and papers beneath floorboards that creak if stepped on too heavily. The first global response does not come from armies, or parliaments, or grand speeches. It comes from people with nothing but conviction, acting with quiet, incandescent courage. You see them in your mind, a silhouette leaning over a small lamp, inking a message that might never be read, but must be written anyway. The world responds with whispers of defiance. The intellectual world sounds the alarm. Writers respond in ink. Philosophers respond in essays. Professors respond in lectures, delivered to half-empty halls, where the remaining students take careful notes, fingers trembling slightly. Books appear in London shops, arguing against appeasement. Newspapers in New York publish long editorials, warning of the dangers of surrendering truth itself. Parisian journals shift tone, from intrigue to alarm. Swiss and Scandinavian papers write with growing clarity, their distance giving them perspective. Others struggle to maintain. These are not fiery condemnations. These are quiet analyses, written in the language of fatigue, concern, and hard-earned clarity. You picture a dim library, dusty sunlight filtering through high windows, desks arranged beneath towering shelves. Somewhere in that stillness, a writer bends over a manuscript that might someday prove prophetic. The world responds with intellectual resistance, slow but persistent. Diplomats navigate a narrowing path. In embassies across Europe, diplomats attempt to thread a needle, whose eye narrows each month. British male ambassadors walk stone corridors, with documents tucked under their arms. French female envoys negotiate in drawing rooms, where tea cools untouched. Scandinavian officials draft memoranda, filled with cautious wording and carefully measured restraint. The world's political class is trapped between two truths. To act risks war. To do nothing invites it. You stand in a Berlin diplomatic district. As snow begins to fall, it lands silently on car roofs, on embassy gates, on polished boots standing guard. The diplomats inside speak in low voices, aware that history listens, through walls thinner than they appear. The world responds with hesitant diplomacy, as fragile as a single snowflake landing on the cold metal of a railing. The world's neutrals shift in their chairs. Switzerland tightens its borders. Sweden expands certain industries. Spain, recovering from civil war, watches with a mixture of fear and recognition. Portugal listens cautiously. Through radio static, neutral nations feel the pressure of a world being pulled apart, not by sudden violence, but by accumulating momentum. Bankers hesitate. Trade routes wobble. Harbour masters pause before approving shipments. Even neutrality has a pulse, and its rhythm grows irregular. The world responds with unsettled silence. When silence finally breaks, there comes a moment when the global response shifts from slow recognition to undeniable clarity. Sometimes it's a speech, sometimes it's a broadcast, sometimes it's a single photograph printed in a newspaper that stops readers cold. For many, the moment arrives when the scale of aggression can no longer be dismissed as strategy, politics, or negotiation. It becomes obvious what the world is facing. You see it in British male workers lining up to enlist. You see it in French female nurses volunteering in clinics already preparing beds. You see it in American male factory owners meeting behind closed doors to discuss production quotas for equipment not yet officially ordered. Even distant nations feel the shift. It is a collective exhale, the letting go of denial. The world responds with awakening. A planet leaning into its fate. As the 1930s fade, the world no longer walks, but leans toward confrontation, toward inevitability, toward a storm whose shape grows clearer each month. Ships change course, factories repurpose, armies rearm quietly, almost reluctantly. In Tokyo, newspapers write about Europe with sharpened interest. In Moscow, Soviet male commanders watch German movements with cold, analytical eyes. In Ottawa and Canberra, governments measure their commitments carefully, but seriously. The global mood shifts, like a massive weather front, rolling across continents. You stand again at the shoreline, where this chapter began. The wind is stronger now, the horizon darker, the waves more insistent. The world has responded, not yet with fire, but with recognition. Recognition becomes preparation. Preparation becomes resolve. And resolve, once awakened, rarely goes back to sleep. Soft descent toward the epilogue. The world is no longer wondering. It is waiting, waiting for a spark that will ignite what everyone now feels in their bones, waiting for the moment when the quiet storm becomes something louder. You breathe in the cold sea air and feel the shift. The world has responded. Now it will have to endure. What comes next? The water at your feet retreats, drawing a long, thin line of foam across the sand. The epilogue waits beyond that line, soft, reflective, and ready to gather the story into silence. Epilogue: The wind that remains. Night settles gently over the present day, and for a moment you almost forget how far you've traveled. From torchlit rallies to broken glass, from annexed cities to fields trembling under the first roar of war. Time folds strangely when history speaks in whispers. You find yourself standing somewhere quiet now, in a world that has long since moved beyond the men and moments that shaped the storm. The air is calm, the horizon steady, the lights of modern life flickering in steady, unaffected patterns. And yet, if you listen closely, if you let your thoughts drift, you can still feel a faint tremor beneath the present, like a heartbeat carried across decades. History never disappears. It lingers, in the wind, in the silence, in the way we watch the world when it feels fragile. Tonight, the past rests like a gentle weight on the air, not heavy, not frightening, just present, a reminder. What the night leaves behind. As you breathe in the quiet, you sense echoes of the moments that shaped the road to war. The newspapers trembling in cafe hands during the chaos of Weimar. The glass glittering like frost after Kristallnacht. The boots marching across the Austrian border to cheers. The ink drying on the Munich agreement. The smoke rising over the Polish countryside at dawn. These echoes do not ask you to judge. They ask you to understand, to recognize how easily fear can shape belief, how quickly certainty can silence doubt, how quietly freedoms can slip away when people are tired, how the world can choose hope over vigilance, and in doing so, misunderstand danger for a second time. You stand here now, in the stillness, and it feels as if the night is offering you something. Not fear, not sorrow, but clarity, a truth carried gently through the years. The rise of fascism was not an explosion. It was a drift, a slow tilt in the balance of ordinary days, a quiet rearranging of words, rules, expectations, 1,000 small moments where people looked away. The storm did not come because darkness was strong. It came because silence was easier. What survives the storm? But storms do not only destroy, they reveal. Even in the darkest chapters, you caught glimpses of something unbroken. The man in Vienna who whispered, "Not all of us wanted this." The teacher who hesitated before repeating a mandated phrase. The father in a Warsaw apartment who told his children to stay close, not because he believed in hope, but because he believed in them. A world can tilt, it can fracture, it can fall into ruin, and yet the small, human instinct to protect one another survives more often than history records. You feel it now as a soft ache in the chest. A reminder that courage rarely announces itself. It appears quietly, on the edges, in pauses, in refusals, in the simple act of remembering what kind of person you want to be. When the world turns uncertain, history tells us what happened. Memory tells us what mattered. Standing in the present. You look around your own world, different century, different fears, different hopes, and yet the patterns feel familiar in subtle ways. You hear echoes in conversations about division, in debates about freedom and identity, in the way truth sometimes bends beneath the weight of convenience. And you realize, the rise of fascism is not just a story about the past. It is a mirror we hold up to the present, quietly, carefully, with the hope that we will notice the small shifts before they become storms. But this is not a warning whispered in fear. It is an invitation whispered in calm, an invitation to pay attention, to listen, to remain awake in the gentle human ways that matter most, because the opposite of darkness is not light, it is awareness. The wind moves on. A breeze stirs around you now, soft, unhurried. It carries no slogans, no marching boots, no smoke from burning cities, just the night, just the present. Just the quiet fact that you are here, listening to a story the world once lived through, so that you might understand your own more clearly. You exhale slowly. The past loosens its grip. The echoes soften. The long corridor of history recedes into a gentle hum. What remains is a sense of stillness, the kind that settles after the waves have pulled back from shore, leaving only the hiss of sand shifting beneath water. You stand in that stillness for a moment longer, feeling the calm settle around your shoulders, feeling your breath grow slower, heavier, warmer. The storm has passed. What remains is the wind, and the wind remembers everything. You listen now, to wind moving through tall grass, to water flowing over stones, to the soft, persistent heartbeat of a world learning to begin again, because stories of war are never about war alone. They are about endurance, memory, and the quiet courage it takes to rebuild after everything falls apart. And as the light settles warmly across the valley, you hear the final whisper. You're listening to echoes of war,